Racist cop shoots Army Lieutenant Colonel Pentagon. Outraged officer executed. Have you ever wondered a simple traffic stop could lead to unimaginable consequences? One police officer, one soldier, in one dark night. It began as a situation with nothing special, but the outcome would raise a question about justice, truth, and the things we've never seen. Let's listen to this story. But before we begin, I have a question for you. Where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? You might not believe what you're about to hear, but I promise you this story will be unlike anything you've ever witnessed. One evening just outside Washington, D.C., when everything seemed to be going normally, Army officer Jason Carter, who had devoted himself in 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, was driving home. A hero of war, someone who had protected his country, now faced a system he never thought he would have to fight against. He was driving his black BMW, the only car he had allowed himself to buy after being promoted. He had persevered through life's hardships from the ghettos of Baltimore, and now he was driving this car down a quiet street in a Virginia neighborhood. This deserted road was not just the way home, but a symbol of change in his life, a symbol of success, of relentless effort. But all that changed when the red and blue lights of a police car flashed behind him. Officer Ryan Cole, who had never had a favorable view of people like Jason, ordered him to pull over Jason, and with the calm of a soldier who had fought through intense battlefields, was not worried. He knew he hadn't broken any traffic laws, and even as he took his eyes off the road to check the speedometer, he maintained his calm. As the officer approached, Jason's eyes couldn't miss the look of contempt in the officer's gaze. "Your papers." Ryan Cole barked, his tone curt. "You ran a stop sign. Why didn't you stop?" Jason hesitated for a moment, but quickly responded, keeping his voice calm. "Officer, I'm sure I stopped," but what was more concerning wasn't his words, but the tension that began to show on the officer's face. The name Jason Carter had made his gaze darken. He didn't want to listen to reason, didn't want to understand, and certainly didn't want to accept the fact. "And who do you think you are?" Ryan shot back. "What did you call me?" Profanities filled the air, laced with disdain, and at that moment, everything began to change. It wasn't because of a traffic violation nor any criminal act, but because he was a black man in a luxury car, something Ryan could not tolerate. A police officer who had been protected by the system for too long was ready to bring him down simply because he carried a military ID, simply because he was a part of a system that Ryan wanted to control. And what happens next, you wouldn't believe. Follow this story, because what's hidden behind it is not just racism, but something much deeper about power, about concealment, and about what we don't see. And you dare to face the truth. Don't miss it, because this is just the beginning. Jason Carter, 41-year-old African-American soldier, had gone through a journey filled with challenges and hardships. Born and raised in the suburbs of Baltimore, where gunshots and poverty were a part of everyday life, Jason had little choice but to accept fate or stand up and fight. From a young age, he witnessed the discrimination and struggles of his community. Every step on the road to maturity felt like a battle, and those battles taught him how to live strong and resilient. When Jason joined the military, he wasn't just someone seeking new opportunities, but someone willing to face the harsh realities of society. He continuously overcame the barriers of poverty, racism, and pressure from those who didn't believe in him. With 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, Jason proved himself as a resilient soldier, always putting the safety and protection of his comrades first. His actions saved countless lives, and his reputation in the military quickly spread. The scars on his body and soul were marks of the sacrifices he made to protect his country. At 41, Jason had become one of the highest-ranking military officers, earning respect not only from his comrades, but also from military commanders. He was the head of a Pentagon cybersecurity team tasked with protecting the country from dangerous cyber attacks, both from foreign and domestic sources. Not only was he facing threats from hostile nations, but also dangers from extremist groups within the country. But Jason wasn't just a soldier fighting on the battlefield. He was also a man who had to fight in his everyday life, a life that sometimes felt as though society had turned its back on him. Despite 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, enduring countless hardships and dangers, Jason could not escape the shadow of racial discrimination when he returned home. His life seemed perpetually surrounded by injustice and prejudice. Jason Carter's story is not just about fighting on the battlefield, but also about existing within a system that sometimes places him in opposition. He is a symbol of relentless struggle not only to protect what is good, but also to change a system. He has sacrificed so much for. Jason fought not just for his country, but for the right to be treated fairly and equally in society. One late evening, after a tense meeting with Pentagon officials about cybersecurity threats, Jason drove his shiny black BMW, the only car he had ever bought for himself, after a proud promotion. Though this car symbolized success and effort, it also became a target for prejudice and suspicion from those who didn't understand him. Fairfield County, Virginia streets were silent at night, the old houses with neatly trimmed lawns, standing as perfect images of a prosperous society. But to Jason, this place was a contradiction to everything he had gone through. Suddenly, the bright lights of a police car flashed in his rearview mirror. Jason checked his speed. He was driving below the speed limit. Yet when he pulled over a police officer, Ryan Cole approached with a defiant attitude, his hand on his gun. Everything happened too quickly. He didn't give Jason a chance to explain. "Your papers," Ryan barked without greeting or explanation. Jason knew he would face this discomfort. Despite being a military officer, despite fighting and protecting the country, he was still just a black man in the eyes of many, and these prejudices never changed. He stopped, took out his military ID from the passenger seat, placed it on his hand, and clearly communicated every step he took. But it seemed there was no respect from the officer, especially when Ryan's eyes landed on the military ID in Jason's hand. "Who do you think you are?" Ryan shouted, his voice dripping with contempt. "This soldier thinks he can challenge me." Jason felt a tension he couldn't describe spreading throughout his body. A wave surged within him, but he knew he couldn't lose his composure. He was a soldier trained to stay calm, but he was also a black man, and this time racism wasn't going to give him a fair chance, and it was at this moment, when anything could happen, that Jason's life would change forever. One evening when Jason was driving home after a tense meeting at the Pentagon, he didn't know that this routine traffic stop would change everything. Even though he was driving within the speed limit and hadn't made any violations, the flashing red and blue lights of the police still haunted him like a nightmare he had encountered many times before. His heart raced, but he told himself this was just another traffic stop like the others. He still checked his speed, reassured that he wasn't in the wrong, yet he couldn't stop thinking about that strange feeling he had faced his whole life. The feeling of injustice, the unfairness, just because of his skin color. Officer Ryan Cole, stepping out of the patrol car, stared at Jason with clear disdain. Without a word of greeting or civility, he began demanding Jason's papers. The tension surged in Jason's chest, a feeling he knew all too well. It was like a shadow that followed him, no matter how much success, reputation, or anything else he had. Nothing could change that shadow. "Your papers?" Ryan Cole ordered, his voice devoid of any respect, full of discomfort and arrogance. Jason sighed, knowing that this rude behavior was not the first time he had heard it. He calmly stopped the car, took out his papers and placed them in his hand, carefully notifying every movement just as he was trained to do in the military. But there was no leniency or calmness from Ryan. The flashlights from his flashlight shone directly into Jason's eyes, creating a blinding sensation, but Jason remained still, keeping his hands steady on the wheel, staring directly at him. "Who do you think you are?" Ryan spoke again, his hand now resting on his gun. "A soldier wearing a military uniform, daring to defy me." The tension within Jason intensified, but he remained silent, trying to suppress the overwhelming emotions. He was a soldier. He had fought through fierce battles in Afghanistan, facing death every day, and yet now he had to face contempt on the very land he had protected. How could a man who had dedicated his life to his country be treated like this? Jason spoke softly, trying to remain calm. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jason Carter. I serve in the military. I can show you my military ID." Ryan paid no attention to Jason's words. He simply stared at his uniform and coldly replied, "I don't care who you are. I care about what you're doing on the street right now." The tension slowly escalated, but Jason still tried to control the situation. Everything might have ended peacefully if he weren't a person of color. If he didn't live in a society where every action of his was scrutinized simply because of his skin color, maybe he wouldn't be standing here in a traffic stop with no reasonable cause. As a soldier, Jason shouldn't have to worry about such discrimination. But that was the reality. The feeling of helplessness began to overwhelm Jason, a feeling he was all too familiar with. He had stood on battle lines, sweated and bled for this country. But none of that could help him escape the gaze of a police officer filled with hatred. He realized not everyone in this society viewed him as a hero. To some, he was just a target to unleash their anger. "What are you doing?" Jason said, trying to keep his voice steady. Ryan suddenly shouted, "Don't move! Don't even think about doing anything!" And in that moment, before Jason could do anything further, a gunshot rang out in the darkness like a nightmare from which he could never wake. Bullets whizzed through the air, striking Jason's body, awakening a pain he had never felt before. 3 bullets pierced his chest, and blood began to flow, staining the uniform he had always worn with pride. Jason saw everything blur. His vision began to fade, and before he slipped into unconsciousness, thought flashed in his mind. Was this slap in the face a form of revenge for what I had uncovered? Everything shifted into darkness, and Jason felt an eerie stillness in his body. But it wasn't the end. It wasn't the end of Jason Carter, nor was it the end of the battle he had never stopped fighting. Jason's story was just beginning, and the horrific secrets waiting to be uncovered had yet to be revealed. Everything happened so quickly that Jason couldn't fully comprehend it. The dangerous moment had arrived, and in the midst of the pain, he could only rely on the training he had received in the military. He had always been ready to face death on the battlefields of Afghanistan, but now death was coming to him on his own soil, the very land he had once proudly defended. 3 bullets slammed into his body, piercing through his uniform, ending any chance of survival in that moment. They were like knives stabbing into the heart of someone who had lived a life for justice, only to now be forgotten under the hands of hate that robbed him of his right to live. Even though Jason had informed Ryan about his military ID, trying to remain calm, Ryan Cole, the police officer, continued to berate him. "I told you not to move. Why didn't you listen?" His voice was filled with anger and indifference, as though everything in life should follow his command, disregarding truth and justice. There was no respect in his gaze as he looked at Jason, only disdain and power. Jason, in his weakened state, had to pull his hand away from the steering wheel. Feeling blood begin to seep from his chest, he moved gently to open the car door as instructed, but immediately 3 gunshots rang out like a fatal blow. 3 bullets pierced his chest, leaving him unable to breathe, everything fading away. In that brief moment, Jason felt the pain that no soldier, no warrior who had survived fierce battles ever imagined would confront him on the very soil he had fought to protect. The last faint light he saw were the flashing ambulance lights approaching from afar. Medical staff rushed to work, but by now it might have been too late. "He's lost too much blood. We need to move fast," a doctor shouted while trying to administer first aid. "Get him into surgery immediately. We need more doctors to help." Jason could no longer hear anything. The chaotic sounds gradually faded. Once again, he slipped into unconsciousness, his body unable to feel anything other than the coldness surrounding him. But there was one thing he was sure. Death was not the worst part. It was how it came, a life, dedicated and sacrificed to protect a country, now ending in secrecy and justice, and under the hands of those in power who could easily trample the life of a soldier. While Jason lay unconscious, his body became the place where doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to save him outside the hospital. Another battle was beginning. Not a life or death struggle between the soldier and death, but a fight by powerful forces working behind the scenes, trying to cover up the truth of the incident. Those forces sought to protect the image of the assailant, preventing the truth of what happened from coming to light. In a meeting room at the police department, the leaders were holding an emergency meeting. They immediately began discussions on how to cover up the incident. They knew this wasn't a simple case of police violence against a civilian. It had too many consequences. Too many people who could get caught up in this struggle. Those in power didn't want justice to be served. They wanted control and to create a narrative that benefited them. Even though Jason was a soldier capable of challenging the truth, he was not the only one in this fight. The police leaders quickly ordered to conceal all information related to the incident, instructing their colleagues not to disclose anything about Officer Ryan Cole. They even demanded the deletion of video footage of the event to avoid any future complications. It was an assault on the truth, an attempt to protect a system that had become too outdated and corrupt. They were determined to do everything they could to shield a powerful police officer while covering up everything related to the wrongful actions of the system. Meanwhile, in a hidden corner, Gabriella, Jason's wife, was unaware of the secret meetings taking place. All she knew was that her husband was in the operating room, fighting between life and death. Fear and anxiety surged within her with every passing second, feeling like a long, endless year. But at this moment, she also sensed that this battle wouldn't end in the hospital. What she would face in the future would be much greater and far more complex. When she arrived at the hospital, Gabriella realized the situation wasn't as simple as she had thought. She began to sense the coldness and darkness surrounding the incident. The police, their colleagues, and even local figures in power were attempting to create a story different from what had actually happened. A story designed to protect the wrongdoers to maintain the silence. While the doctors and nurses continued their work, Gabriella made a decision of her own. She could not remain silent. She knew her husband wasn't just attacked because he was a person of color, but also because of his work at the Pentagon, where he had been investigating domestic security threats. A job that might have involved powerful people who didn't want the truth to be exposed. She would find the truth and ensure that the criminals did not escape justice. The battle was still ongoing. But this time it wasn't about Jason's life and death struggle. It was a fight for justice. A painful, costly battle, but one full of hope for those who dared to stand up against evil. As soon as Officer Ryan Cole drew his gun and fired 3 shots into Jason Carter's chest, traces of the truth began to vanish. Jason's life, once a symbol of courage and sacrifice, now fell into a dangerous silence as everything around him became part of a sophisticated cover-up. A cover-up not only by the police, but also by agencies that were once expected to protect justice and truth. Gabriella, Jason's loving wife, could not accept this. As a civil rights lawyer, she was used to facing the powerful forces within the legal system. But this time her adversaries were not only the authorities within the police force, but also a system capable of adjusting everything to protect itself. Gabriella understood that the truth wasn't always easily exposed, especially when those in power were trying to obscure the facts. From the very first days after the incident, Gabriella sensed a shift in the attitude of the authorities. The police began changing their narrative, issuing revised reports that downplayed the severity of the incident. They wanted everyone to believe that Ryan Cole had acted in self-defense, that Jason had done something threatening that forced the officer to use force. These explanations were gradually introduced, and the truth of what was a violent incident was quietly concealed. Even the video from the car's dash cam didn't escape alteration. Although the footage could be crucial evidence in clarifying the case, local officials quickly ordered it to be deleted, citing technical difficulties. But Gabriella knew this was merely a clever excuse to protect the criminals, and she would not let the truth be defeated by such a hasty explanation. She began gathering information surrounding the incident, using all of her connections and skills as a civil rights lawyer. Every time she walked into her office, a sense of dread overwhelmed her. She knew that it wasn't just Jason fighting for survival anymore, but now she too had to face a battle that was anything but easy. But Gabriella was someone who never backed down, and she had decided she wouldn't remain silent. Every step she took made the cover-up more apparent. Government officials and police quickly held secret meetings to align their story. They painted a picture of a talented police officer who had to defend himself against a dangerous individual while completely disregarding Jason's circumstances. A soldier, a hero who had dedicated his life to protecting this country. What was particularly disturbing was that Gabriella not only had to confront the authorities, but also had to deal with the silence from her husband's colleagues. Some members of the military, former comrades of Jason in Afghanistan, now couldn't stand by him in this crucial moment. They didn't speak out, but she could sense their reluctance in their attitudes as the relationships between the military and police were so deeply intertwined. They didn't want to cause any trouble. They didn't want to oppose the system they had once served. Gabriella, with a determined heart, realized that she had to be the one to lead this fight, or no one would stand up for her husband. Outside the hospital, the cover-up grew even more evident. Medical staff didn't report Jason's condition inaccurately. They were forced to alter records to fit the story that the authorities had constructed. Gabriella, in a state of intense stress, began to feel the unease spreading through both the medical and legal systems. She couldn't even trust those who were supposed to protect justice for her husband. Instead, they were participating in a systemic cover-up. Over the following days, Gabriella never stopped calling for justice. She continuously reached out to civil rights organizations, citizen advocacy groups, and sought to connect with her lawyer colleagues to rally support. She knew that this cover-up was not just about protecting a police officer who had committed a crime, but part of a larger campaign to shield the dark forces within the system. She began researching Ryan Cole's background, looking for any connections that could shed light on the relationship between him and the powerful forces within the system. One crucial piece of the puzzle Gabriella uncovered was a network of relationships between certain police officers and secret organizations. They didn't just act for personal reasons, but were deeply connected to those behind national security attacks. This information made Gabriella feel even more certain about the nature of the battle she was facing. It wasn't just about racial discrimination. It was a fight against a system that had been hijacked by those with power and ambition. With an unyielding determination, Gabriella did everything she could to fight against this cover-up, knowing that ahead of her lay significant challenges. The forces trying to protect Ryan Cole were not easily defeated, but Gabriella was not afraid. She had witnessed too many human rights violations, and this time she would not let justice be fooled again. The story of Jason and Gabriella was not just a legal battle, but a testament to what happens when a system begins to cover up wrongdoing. Gabriella would have to work tirelessly to bring justice to her husband and to all those who had been trampled by the system. She was not just fighting for Jason, but for the truth and justice, because in this world, no one could escape responsibility forever. Gabriella Walker was not one to easily succumb to difficulties. From the moment the incident occurred when her husband, Jason Carter, was brutally shot during an unclear traffic stop, she decided she would not let the truth be buried under layers of silence and cover-ups. She was not just facing a personal case, but standing in the midst of a larger battle, a fight against the forces that had obstructed justice and those trying to obscure the truth. Despite the threats, despite the moments of despair, Gabriella did not stop. She understood clearly that if she stepped back, not only would Jason never get justice, but millions of others would also never have the chance. Because if she accepted silence today, no one would speak out against oppression tomorrow. She was not just a heartbroken wife, but also a civil rights lawyer, one who was accustomed to standing up against the injustices of society, and this time she would not back down. In the days following Jason's hospitalization, Gabriella tirelessly searched for evidence to uncover the truth. She contacted human rights organizations, worked with other lawyers to gather information that could clarify the case. She knew that every action she took mattered, that every passing hour meant evidence could be destroyed and the story would be distorted. Despite facing many challenges and threats from those trying to conceal the truth, Gabriella refused to give up. One of the greatest challenges Gabriella faced was the silence and cover-up from the very system she had once trusted. She could not understand why those in power so easily accepted a false narrative just to protect an officer. The cover-up didn't just stop at the local level, but extended to higher authorities. So Officer Ryan Cole, the one who shot her husband, was not only being protected by his colleagues, but by a legal system that tried to make everything murky. As she gradually realized the battle before her was a difficult one, Gabriella kept persevering. Each day she fought not only for her husband, but for all those who were oppressed by the system. She thought of those who had no voice, those who had no opportunity to fight, those whom society had overlooked. Her husband may be lying in the hospital, but justice could not stop there. At times she felt exhausted. The threatening calls began to grow more serious, and the cruel words from hidden enemies made her feel on the brink of collapse. She could not protect Jason in the way she wanted, but she understood that she was the one who could help him, and not just him, but many others. Her resilience was not a choice, it was a responsibility. She could not bear to see her husband, a soldier, a hero in the war, die without justice. One rainy night, while sitting in her office with the case files, Gabriella received a call from a stranger. On the other end of the line was someone claiming to be a retired police officer, someone who had quit after witnessing the wrongdoings within the force. This person told her that if she wanted to uncover the truth, she needed to start looking for evidence in a place no one would think to, the relationships between police officers and those with power beyond the law. Gabriella felt a glimmer of hope. This was an avenue she hadn't tried yet, and perhaps it would bring her closer to the truth. With this person's help, Gabriella began her own investigation. She uncovered suspicious connections between Officer Ryan Cole and several individuals within the police force. They were not just colleagues, but had ties to powerful organizations with far-reaching influence in society. Gabriella could hardly believe her eyes as pieces of the truth began to emerge. This wasn't just a case of police violence. It was a combination of corruption, power, and hatred that the system had nurtured for years. With each step, Gabriella felt she was standing before an enormous iceberg. She began to realize that Jason's case was not just an example of racial discrimination, but part of a larger strategy by those trying to protect this system, even though they knew it had been deeply corrupted. But Gabriella did not falter. She was too familiar with fighting against forces that would never give in. Meanwhile, Jason, though still in critical condition, began to recover in a miraculous way. The days in the hospital were filled with pain, but he could always feel Gabriella's presence by his side. He knew that even though he might never return to who he was before, there would come a day when he would rise and continue fighting. His battle wasn't just for survival, but for the ideals he had devoted his life to. Gabriella continued her struggle. Each day, every step she took was filled with challenges, but she was no longer fighting just for herself. She was fighting for Jason, for the truth, and for justice. She knew that despite the challenges ahead, she would never allow silence and cover-up to cloud her vision. Eventually, Gabriella realized that this battle was not just the battle of a wife. It was the battle of the oppressed, the battle of anyone who believed in justice and truth. And no matter how many challenges lay ahead, she would not give up, because she knew that only by fighting could fairness prevail. The story of Gabriella and Jason was no longer just a personal case. It quickly became a symbol for a larger movement and attracting the attention not only of the community of justice advocates, but also of those who were starting to recognize the injustices within the system. Gabriella, the resilient wife, and Jason, the soldier who had given his all in the war, had become role models for those who believed in fairness and justice. Despite the subtle racism that pervaded society, Jason's case made society begin to face questions that had long been suppressed. Was what we saw in the video truly the full truth, or was it just part of a larger conspiracy that we couldn't yet see? Gabriella and Jason were not just facing powerful forces within the police department. They had risen to become warriors at the forefront of the fight against the dark forces that manipulated society. The evidence from the police car's dash cam continued to stir controversy in public opinion. Even though repeated justifications were made by the police, the question remained haunting. Why would an officer act so decisively against a man with no weapon, simply driving home after a business meeting? Gabriella and her allies began to ask, was this just an isolated incident, or was someone trying to cover up a larger truth, a conspiracy that those in power had worked to conceal for years? The community quickly split into two factions. One side stood with Gabriella and Jason demanding justice for the soldier who had sacrificed for his country, for the man who was attacked solely because of his skin color. The other side, mostly police defenders, maintained that Officer Ryan Cole had acted in accordance with protocol and that there was nothing wrong with the incident. However, these people gradually realized that this case was not simply a struggle between a police officer and a suspect. It was a battle between justice and system protection, a fight between truth and concealment. The question of the cover-up by those in power quickly gained media attention. Newspapers began to closely follow every move Gabriella made, not only because of the incident, but also because of what she had uncovered during her investigation. Gabriella was not just a heartbroken wife, but a lawyer with a keen perspective. She began to ask the questions no one dared to ask, challenging the leaders within the police department and the authorities. More and more information was being revealed, not just from Gabriella, but also from people within the industry, former police officers, and even members of the armed forces. They provided Gabriella with valuable snippets of information, small pieces that the system was desperately trying to hide. Slowly, Gabriella began to realize that this incident was not just an isolated event, but part of a larger strategy, a strategy involving powerful figures in society, individuals who could manipulate and protect wrongdoers within the system. The community began asking questions. Who is really behind this incident? Who benefits from Jason being shot and the truth being concealed? Resistance no longer came solely from those fighting for justice, but also from ordinary citizens, those who wanted to know the truth behind the event. Protests began erupting in major cities demanding transparency and justice. Slogans like "Justice for Jason Carter" and "It's time to speak the truth" echoed down the streets. The media, although initially cautious, gradually became caught up in the outrage and the community's demand for justice. Journalists began digging deeper into the case, interviewing witnesses and seeking out internal sources. The community began demanding answers from the authorities and the police system. Was what they had witnessed really the truth, or was it just part of a bigger cover-up in the protection of a network of powerful individuals manipulating everything from behind the scenes? With each passing day, the truth began to emerge. The protests grew more intense. People, regardless of race or background, united to demand fairness. Gabriella was no longer just a wife fighting for her husband, but had become a symbol of the battle against powerful forces. Jason Carter's story, from a senseless shooting, had turned into a symbol of a larger struggle, a fight against racial discrimination, and the manipulation of the powerful within society. Under the growing wave of demands for justice, the figures behind the incident began to feel the pressure. Could they continue to maintain silence and cover up? Could Gabriella and the community win this fight? These questions would soon be answered. But for now, what was clear was that what was happening was changing everything. And Gabriella, with all her courage and determination, was steadily steering this story toward an ending no one could have predicted. Secrets and Conspiracies Unveiled. Gabriella was not one to easily give up, especially when she knew that the full truth had not yet been revealed. Initially, she thought that Jason was just a victim of horrific racial discrimination, like so many other men of color in society. But as she dug deeper into the case, Gabriella gradually realized that the situation was far from simple. Her first discoveries came when she met unofficial witnesses, people who had seen details that the police did not want to reveal. Some individuals within the police force began to share vague but important information, hinting that Ryan Cole, the officer who attacked Jason, was not acting solely out of personal bias. Stories about the infiltration of extremist groups into law enforcement had surfaced in secret conversations. Gabriella could hardly believe what she was hearing. She understood that the attack on her husband was not just the act of an officer manipulated by personal prejudice, but might be part of a larger campaign to conceal dangerous threats to national security. Questions began to form in her mind. Did Jason uncover something that those within this system wanted to keep hidden? Did he come too close to a dangerous truth they couldn't let out? The reports Gabriella had gathered from confidential sources gradually indicated that Jason, in his role as the head of the Pentagon's cybersecurity team, might have discovered important information about the infiltration of extremist groups within law enforcement. These groups were not only linked to individuals in security forces, but also had access to critical national infrastructure such as power plants, military bases, and information systems. The more Gabriella investigated, the more she realized that this attack was not a random act. Jason was not just a soldier randomly targeted because of his skin color. He might have been targeted by those who wanted to prevent him from exposing this crucial information. The shooting was not a simple mistake, but part of a larger strategy to prevent sensitive information about extremist groups infiltrating the police force and national security facilities from being exposed. Gabriella couldn't stop thinking about everything she had uncovered. She knew this could completely change the direction of the investigation. If her discoveries were true, this case wasn't just about racial discrimination in law enforcement. It was a conspiracy to conceal horrific national security threats. These were secrets that many within the system wanted to keep hidden, not just out of shame, but because they feared that releasing this information could disrupt the security system they had worked so hard to build. With unwavering determination, Gabriella continued to search for the truth. She knew that justice for Jason was not just a personal right, but a demand for justice for all those who had no voice in this society. She didn't just want to protect her husband. She wanted to expose the truths that had been buried for so long. This system had made the mistake of dismissing the truth, but Gabriella would not let those responsible escape punishment. Every step she took was filled with danger. The powerful figures within the police system and the government were trying to shut down her investigation, but Gabriella was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. She knew that confronting these forces wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that if she didn't stand up, the truth would remain buried forever. The community began to realize that this was not just a family's fight, it was the fight of society as a whole. Gabriella had become a symbol of resilience. A woman fighting not only for her family, but for all those who had been oppressed. She began receiving support from many civil rights groups, people who had fought in the past, and younger individuals who were seeking change. But what Gabriella could not anticipate were the deeper connections she would uncover. The conspiracies and truths behind this incident were not just the story of a police officer and a soldier. It was the story of an all-out battle where power and secrets were protected at all costs, and only those willing to face the truth could hope for change. Jason's story wasn't just about an attack. It was about the confrontation between truth and cover-up, between justice and concealment. Gabriella knew that no matter what happened, she would not stop until the truth was exposed. The confrontation in the courtroom. Gabriella stepped into the courtroom with a determined gaze, unshakable in her resolve. Today was the pivotal day. The day when not only she, but the entire nation would face the secrets that had been hidden for too long. The courtroom was silent, the air tense like a stretched string about to snap. All eyes were on Gabriella, the woman who had decided to fight not just for justice for her husband, but to shed light on a part of the darkness hovering the powerful forces in society. Facing Officer Ryan Cole, Gabriella didn't need an apology or justification. She didn't care about the regret or fake remorse that Ryan might offer. This wasn't a personal story. It was a confrontation with the truth and justice, a confrontation Gabriella knew could only be resolved by exposing what had been hidden. All this time, Ryan stood before Gabriella with an expression void of regret, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern, as if he knew what was about to unfold wouldn't be as easy as the times before. Ryan Cole had stood in this courtroom many times, but this time he was facing someone who couldn't be bought or threatened. Gabriella had decided she would not let a man like Ryan run rampant within this system. Gabriella clutched the file in her hands, the evidence she had diligently collected over the months. She stood before the jury, saying little. She didn't need to speak much. She simply needed to present the truth. And the truth was that what Ryan Cole did wasn't just a personal act. Behind it was a system, a network connected to deep-seated conspiracies that Gabriella and Jason had unexpectedly become entangled in. These secrets, the people behind Ryan Cole, all needed to be brought into the light. Gabriella began reading from the investigation report, exposing the truth she had uncovered. She spoke of Ryan Cole's ties to extremist groups within the police force, of the calls he made before and after shooting Jason, of the photos he had taken of soldiers just before the incident occurred. Everything became clear. Ryan was not just a racist cop. He was part of a much larger conspiracy. This was not a random mistake. Gabriella said, her voice firm, but filled with pain. This was a meticulously planned operation, and Ryan Cole is the tool in the hands of those pulling the strings behind him. The atmosphere into the courtroom grew heavy, and the jury began to see the contradictions in Ryan's testimony. He insisted that he was just following orders and felt threatened. But Gabriella had proven that Ryan knew exactly who he was facing. She continued to present key details, from secret conversations within the police force to Jason's ongoing investigations before he was attacked. Ryan, despite his efforts to maintain a stoic face, couldn't hide his growing anxiety. His gaze darted around the room. Sometimes meeting the eyes of the jurors, it became increasingly clear that his story was unraveling, piece by piece. "Have you ever thought about what you've done, Ryan?" Gabriella continued, her voice no longer just a challenge but a call to the conscience of a man. "You nearly caused my husband's death, but in the process you've also lost yourself. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everyone you swore to protect." Gabriella knew that while today might not be the day true justice would be fully served, this was the moment when those responsible would no longer be able to hide. This was when the truth would be recognized, no matter how painful it was. Gabriella wasn't just fighting for her husband. She was fighting for all those who had been oppressed by this system. And then, as all the evidence was presented, Ryan finally broke his silence. He began answering Gabriella's questions in a hoarse voice, admitting what he had done. But he didn't just admit to the incident with Jason. He began to reveal the people behind the attack, those who had manipulated him for so long. And this was when everything truly began to come to light. Gabriella's story wasn't just about an attack or a racist cop. It was the story of a corrupt system, a web of conspiracies existing right under everyone's noses. It was a confrontation with no mercy, where the truth finally came to the surface. Gabriella had taken the first step in her long fight, but she knew this was just the beginning. This fight was not just about Jason's survival. It was a fight for everyone facing injustice in this society, the changes within the system. Gabriella and Jason's story opened a door to an underground revolution in society, a struggle that didn't just aim to find the perpetrators of an attack, but also served as a reminder of the deep injustices that existed within the justice system. After the truth about the attack on Jason was exposed, Gabriella became more than just a wife fighting for her husband. She had become a symbol of justice, of uncompromising change. Gabriella's journey was not a smooth one. After proving the conspiracy behind the attack, she realized that what she had done was not just a personal battle. Every step she took was a fight against the corruption in the police system, against a power structure that could conceal the truth in order to protect the influential forces. But the truth could not be hidden forever. Gabriella didn't just win a lawsuit. She had won over the justice system itself, a system that had long protected the powerful and ignored innocent victims. Her story not only captured the attention of her family and friends, but quickly became a national campaign. People didn't just talk about the attack, but also about the changes Gabriella was bringing. Grotesque civil rights organizations and lively discussions in the media began to address larger issues about fairness and equality in society. The entire system, from government agencies to social organizations, began to realize that what had happened in the shadows was no longer a secret, and Gabriella had become the leader of this fight. As investigations delved into hidden issues, a clear connection emerged between racial discrimination in the police force and organized attacks designed to silence people like Jason, those trying to expose the truth. Reforming the justice system. Gabriella knew that her battle didn't end with bringing Ryan Cole and those involved to justice. That was just one part of the story. She began using her influence to push for extensive reforms within the legal system. She began working with civil rights organizations, lawmakers, and experts in national security to craft new legislation to prevent extremist groups from infiltrating law enforcement. With each meeting and exchange with political leaders, Gabriella emphasized that justice could no longer be distorted under the influence of power and corruption. "We need a new justice system," Gabriella said in a closed meeting with senators. "This system can no longer just protect the powerful. It must protect the most vulnerable in society. Justice is not a privilege for a group of people. It is the right of every citizen." These weren't just words. Gabriella began gathering evidence, information, and documents from people within the system, those who wanted change but lacked the courage to speak out. She gained support from soldiers, those who had fought like Jason, and experienced political figures who saw in her struggle an opportunity to bring about real change. But taking on such a powerful system wasn't going to be easy. Many began to worry about these changes. Powerful groups, from large police organizations to business leaders closely connected with the government, were concerned that these changes would upset the balance of power. Gabriella understood that she couldn't change everything in a day, but she also knew that once the fire was lit, it wouldn't easily be extinguished. Justice is not just revenge. But Gabriella also realized that justice wasn't just about avenging the harm done to her family. It was about ensuring that what had happened would never happen again. She didn't just want the criminals to pay the price. She wanted to ensure that others wouldn't face similar injustices. Thus, she began drafting bills to protect the rights of victims of racial discrimination in administrative and police procedures. She wanted new oversight processes, clear mechanisms to ensure that no one could abuse their power. Each time Gabriella presented new initiatives, her allies and civil rights organizations supported her, but there were also determined opponents. Legal battles continued without pause. But Gabriella couldn't back down. She knew that change would never come easily, and if she wanted a truly just society, she had to face these challenges head on. One important step Gabriella took was building a strong legal network to protect civil rights lawyers and dissenting organizations. She and her allies began preparing for the next legal battles, as efforts to amend the laws were not just a matter of legal reform, but also a struggle against the political powers opposing these changes. Meanwhile, Gabriella and Jason's lives began to stabilize. Although Jason's physical and mental scars had not fully healed, they both began to find comfort in each other's love and the support of their community. They knew that their fight had not only brought results for their family, but also marked the beginning of a wave of change throughout society. Is society more just? The big question still remains unanswered. Can society truly change to become a truly just one? Can the justice system change fast enough to protect all the vulnerable? And how do we deal with the powerful groups that defend racism and injustice? But for Gabriella, the answer isn't as important as the fact that every day, every hour, she is tirelessly working to create those changes. She understands that justice is not just a slogan, but a long journey. But she will continue on that journey no matter the distance. After months of relentless struggle, and countless challenges that seemed insurmountable, justice was finally served. Jason Carter, a soldier who had courageously fought on the battlefield, had now become a symbol not only for what he had given to his country, but also for his resilient and unyielding heart in the fight for justice. It wasn't just because of his sacrifice in war, but also because of his relentless fight for a society free from racial discrimination in a truly just justice system. Jason's story was not just a personal battle, it was a fight for all of us. It reminds us that the truth will never be hidden forever, no matter how powerful the forces trying to protect the wrongdoings may be. When powerful forces seek to distort the truth, there are courageous individuals like Gabriella and Jason who stand up not only to protect what is right, but to push for profound reforms in society. And this story serves as a reminder of the strength of truth, justice, and resilience values we cannot afford to lose. In a society full of injustices, where power sometimes overshadows justice, Jason became proof that one individual can change an entire system. We cannot remain silent in the face of wrongdoing, nor can we accept the indifference of the system. From Jason's fight, we realize that justice is not something distant. It is something we can claim by standing up and fighting for what is right. The larger question. This story is not just about solving a single case. It opens up larger questions that society still has yet to fully address. The issue of racism and the relationship between justice and national security is one that cannot be ignored. Do we have the courage to face and truly understand these issues, or will we continue pretending not to see them? So what do you think about racial discrimination in the justice system and the relationship between justice and national security? Are we truly evaluating these issues, or are they still just questions without answers? Leave your thoughts below this video. Don't forget to hit like if you believe in justice for everyone, and subscribe to follow the next episodes in this shocking investigation. This is not just the story of an individual, it's the story of all of us, those who want to live in a fairer society where no one has to face discrimination and where justice is upheld without exception.